Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to The Unspoken Truth. I'm your host, Robert Russ, and I'm joined by my fabulous co-host, Ed Anderson. Here we are on a Sunday, US time, Monday morning, 5:30 a.m. Sydney time with an unannounced broadcast. Normally we have one more day off, but so much has been going on over the weekend. We thought we'd dive in here and have a little bit of fun and show you what's going on with the so-called Russian revolution that fizzled out to be nothing. How you doing, Ed?
I'm living the dream. It's a beautiful day here. We had that little storm last night, burned away some of the humidity. So life is pretty good, actually. And, our audience is so lucky that you and I don't have a social life. So we can take our days off and and show up for them. No, I'm just kidding, guys. We're both, just social butterflies. But we're here for you. It'd be kind of curious to see whether we get any additional followers today, since we're doing it on a Sunday, Sunday here. So we'll see. If you're watching, please let us know. Give us a hello and maybe make some comments.
Yeah, we'd love to hear your thoughts and opinions on what's been going on in Europe. It was potentially, when I was watching the situation unfold, I thought maybe this is one of the biggest things that we'll ever see in our time, meaning the overthrow of the Russian government. But I was sitting there thinking, that's what they want you to see. That the whole thing is a ruse. The whole thing is not what you think. The unspoken truth is always very different to the reality that you expect. So in this episode, we're going to talk about the Wagner revolution, where I'm going to stick to that single topic. And I'm going to show you why I think it wasn't what you think, and why the whole ruse will mean that the angle of this battle will go from the south to the north, and what it all means for our forces, what it means for the Western forces, and certainly for the Russian forces as well. So if you don't know, folks, Yevgeny Prigozhin, the owner of the Wagner group, is one of Putin's best mates. He's on the inside of Putin's inner circle, and he owns the Wagner group, of course, and there's about 25,000 soldiers that he's got, properly armed, properly trained. They're much better than the Russian regular military, and they're the ones responsible for taking back Bakhmut in the east. But the problem that he's faced is that he claims consistently on social media, and he's like a vlogger. He's out there constantly talking on social media, particularly on Telegram, that the Russian military is simply not supporting him. And he's got a famous video where he's standing in front of about 50 bodies that have been pulled straight from the battlefield, and he's like, look, these guys are still warm and they're dead. And the reason they're dead is because you haven't sent us any ammunition, you haven't sent us any weapons, you're not supporting us, you want us to go and fight for you, we're here to fight for you, everyone's a volunteer here, but you're not supporting us, like, what's going on here? And you can kind of see his perspective, and there's a lot of people out there saying that, look, this whole thing is it's a ruse. The whole thing is a ruse. What he's saying is a ruse, and a whole thing is a CIA op to say, look how divided the Russian military is, and eventually this will end up as a civil war. And I've got to say, when I saw this unfolding in the last couple of days, I was thinking that there's no way to fake the footage that they had when they went into Rostov and they took the Ministry of Defense in Rostov. There's no way to fake that. There was no real way to fake the firefights that were going on and the shooting that was going on, and there's no way to fake the helicopters that were shot down either. So the Wagner mercenary group had decided that it was a good idea for Russians to be killing fellow Russians. But I wonder if that was actually all just a beat up. And what you're seeing can also be staged. A lot of it can be staged. The problem with trying to stage something like this at scale is that there's other people out there with their mobile phones. And the amount of footage that you see that's out there going out in Twitter and Telegram is not very much. And you're seeing the same footage over and over and over again. And I just ask myself, is that what the Russians want us to see? They're really good at disinformation. They're really good at creating this. They might not be so good on the battlefield or as good as you think that they are, but they're really good at disinformation. What were you seeing, Ed, as it was unfolding? What were your thoughts, mate?
Yeah, okay, so I remember, put in context from my point of view. Okay, so it's Friday evening, here, and Rob and I had finished our Friday episode, about a couple hours earlier. And we said, well, I'll see you sometime during the weekend. We always chat, offline. And within a couple hours, Rob sends me a little message. Hey, you see what's going on? I was like, oh, well, that's an interesting wrinkle. Listen, this guy had the potential of being an historic event. At first blush, right? Because a potential coup. And look, this is very early stuff, and information was very, hit and miss, and you didn't know what to trust. And so it was very interesting. Now, I was just starting to think, well, what should I be talking about on Monday? Well, how will this affect the markets, for example? Well, it is convenient that it happened on a weekend. Yeah.
Just saying, man,
Just saying.
There's no bank collapse or anything associated yet, but.
Yeah, that's right. So I was going to do a video on how this could affect what you should be doing in anticipation of this event. And but then I wake up this morning and it turned out to be, all right, well, that saved me time. I don't have to do that video anymore. But I had all sorts of questions that came out of this. Because this weekend, boy, it was manna from heaven for these networks to do their specials, right? They had all their guests on, and they all had opinions, and I was thinking like you, all right, you gotta wonder whether, because they had a narrative, and everybody has a narrative. It's all propaganda, and you don't know what the truth is until way down the line. So it's hard to sift through. So all you can do is kind of have some fun and kind of game it out. Well, if this happened, then what does it mean? And even though this turns out to be a non-event, well, is it really a non-event? And that's really what I'm looking forward to exploring, because there's plenty of clues to get from this event that I want to explore with Rob today. So
yeah, absolutely. I have to say, Ed, after we wrapped up on Saturday morning, your Friday, I felt just a couple of hours later, man, I felt a little bit embarrassed. And I was like, oh, man, I didn't realize, but virtually the entire week, I was an instrument of the deep state. In my big fat mouth and my expensive microphone and my fancy camera and my stupid YouTube channel, all this garbage, I thought, damn it, I've been drawn in by the Matrix. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, folks, the submarine that went missing over the Titanic, the American Navy knew that it had gone missing on the Sunday, meaning my Saturday, and literally on the Friday, my time, like 6 days later or something like that, they're like, we knew that it blew up like 6 days ago. It was gone. Like it blew up when it was descending down, and we heard something. And John Kirby in the Pentagon went, yeah, we heard something, but we just couldn't be sure what that was. And it's like, if you knew that was there, and the whole thing was a ruse, the whole thing was designed to distract you from JP Morgan losing 40 million emails or some shit like that, Hunter Biden actually being charged and getting a slap on the wrist, and there's about 1,000 other things that the deep state didn't want you to actually look at. And I found a meme on on Saturday night, which I thought was exactly telling. And because I was like, my show's called The Unspoken Truth. We're not supposed to be instruments of the deep state, which try to pull that behind. But you don't know what you don't know, right? I didn't know that the American Navy had that stuff, and I didn't know that. What can you do?
Well, you can only deal with what's in front of you, right?
Exactly.
So we take it as it comes. Now there are no two more skeptical people on earth than Rob and I, right? But so we do our best to try to look at beyond the headline. Well, why are they telling this? What could be the reason behind this? Now, you don't know until later on, because sometimes news is accurate. Sometimes it is a real news story, and you just don't know until you get some perspective.
Well, the thing is, like, when I suddenly realized that the American Navy had that information to say that, yeah, we heard this thing had been demolished and it blew up underwater. Our sensors are super sophisticated. We know that. We found that happen. Then you sort of look back at all of the steps that have happened after they knew that. So it was alerted to the media. Then all of a sudden, it's in mainstream media absolutely everywhere. It's the biggest story in the world. Why is that? Then you look at the press conferences that the Coast Guard gave. So they send out their best and their brightest, and these guys know exactly what they're doing. But you really don't see very much, do you? Do you see how many Coast Guard cutters were steaming towards the Titanic? How many Canadian Navy? And then we hear somebody knocking on the side of the hull under the water, and I even played that audio for us. And you look at that and you think, you really didn't see very much. Like, I didn't see any Coast Guard coasties with their phones filming something that they were doing the search and rescue. There's no filming in the ops room of a ship, somebody listening to a sonar set. There's none of that. It was all exactly what they wanted you to see with a press conference, and they just roll out that guy and go, okay, man, go out there and tell them how you'd actually handle this. And that person is none the wiser as to whether or not it's real or not either. But just the amount of information, like looking back with hindsight, just a couple of hours later, literally, you look and you go, I don't think any of that was actually real. I think the whole thing was a giant CIA operation. And when this comes to this Wagner thing, this is one of the memes that I came across, which I thought was very telling. And as a picture of this dude saying, undercover CIA agent plans just to sit back and enjoy the collapse of Russia. But I'm not entirely convinced that he's planning the collapse of Russia. That's what they want you to think. That's what they want you to think what's happening. So let me share with you what I think is actually happening and the unspoken truth behind it all. Because
hold on one second before you get into that. Okay, so this whole issue about deep fakes and shiny objects, I'm working on a video right now. I'm editing for tomorrow's show, so I hope you all tune in on this BlackRock ETF regarding Bitcoin. And wait until you hear this story. I'm going to tell you something that nobody else is telling you about that story.
You're breaking the news, Ed.
Yeah. But for now, just let me tell you that the government and BlackRock are, if we do what they're doing right now, we would all be in jail. So anyway, so there's a teaser for tomorrow's show. Anyway, go ahead. Sorry, Rob. Go ahead.
Yeah, you're right. Here in Australia, in the last couple of days, it's come out that the Australian government is trying to fine social media companies for people putting out mis and disinformation, and what they want to establish the Ministry of Truth. But who says what's true and what's fake? And we know that Facebook said that all of the COVID stuff that was censored on Facebook was just somebody's opinion. So why would the government be any different? And we know that the government outsourced all of their censorship to a third-party company to actually stay at arm's length from and say, oh, well, it wasn't us. It's a third-party company that's looking for information saying it's outside the terms of these actual platforms. What we're doing here is we're toying with totalitarianism. And if you're going to play with that, you're going to get your fingers burnt. And this is a very, very serious thing. And, Obama came out in the last week and said, everybody should have to scan in every time they use the internet. Well, dumbass, everybody uses Google Chrome and you're logged into your Google Chrome because it's convenient and useful for you. We're already scanned in, you dumbass. That just shows me how stupid these people actually are, and they don't even realize what's going on. And all of the laws and the rules say that they keep all the metadata of everything that your browser looks at, especially when you're logged in. They're not looking at you while you're looking, but if you commit a crime, they can go back and look at the metadata of your browser to see what you actually did wrong there. So, the lesson in that is don't commit a crime using Google Chrome, Microsoft Edge, or any normal regular browser. You need to get yourself on Tor, use the Onion browser, and get yourself inside the dark web to be able to do that. Yeah. But even then, they know what you're doing when it's in there. There's no real hiding. You can't get away from it, right? Just don't be a dickhead and don't do the wrong thing, and maybe this 1984 bullshit will go away. But no, I don't think so. Anyway, let's shift gears to exactly what's going on with Wagner and what I think is going on with Wagner. So we all know that Prigozhin is one of Putin's inner circle and one of his best mates. And I don't think Prigozhin at any point wants Russians killing Russians. No one wants that. When I was watching this unfold and I'm watching these Wagner BMPs and their tanks and stuff rolling through the Russian cities, and there's Russian soldiers standing on the side, and they've got their weapons by their side and they're just kind of watching. And I'm thinking, most countries on planet Earth wouldn't be able to stop something like that. Meaning, if all of a sudden there was 5,000 troops, there was 4 or 5 battalions of troops and their weapons and their armor rolling into Minnesota right now, what would you do to stop it? I don't know, on a Saturday morning. So they get going driving at 2 o'clock on a Friday night, and Saturday morning they rock up on your doorstep. Everybody is still asleep. And
we buy them all pancakes.
Literally, and that's what the Russians are in these fast food restaurants getting the bacon and egg roll before they get back in their car and start driving to Moscow. And people are bringing them food and water and stuff like that because they're not supplied properly. So, look, fair enough. And the reaction of the Russian cops and the military in Rostov and those various towns is to be expected, because everybody's snoozing on a Saturday morning. It's the weekend. The government doesn't work on the weekend. Doesn't matter. The Russian government doesn't work on the weekend anyway. And I just think about my time in the army. Where I used to live, it's probably a 20-minute drive to the army base. If someone rang me on Friday night and went, "Oh, get to work right now," and I got on my motorbike and teared down the down Heathcote Road at 200 kilometers an hour like I used to and get there and I'd be, all right, okay, cool. Get your shit together, get your webbing, get your pack, go to the armory and get a weapon. Okay, cool. Okay, now go over there and get some ammunition, bomb up, double front line. Put the second front line in your pack, then double front line in your webbing. There we go, okay, cool. So I go and I grab my weapon, my ammunition, and do all that. And then I think to myself, how long would that process take? Well, let me just give you an example. When we used to go parachuting in the Australian Army, and there's only one single parachute battalion, one, count them, one finger, yeah? It would require 12 aircraft to jump us all into an airfield or something like that. We would turn up to work literally at 3 o'clock in the morning, and by the time you went parachuting, it was 2 o'clock in the afternoon. That's how long it takes to coordinate 600 or 700 people to get them on the bus, to get all their gear, to drive them out to the airport, to get all the parachutes lined up, to get the pilots to wake up on time, to get them out, to get the maintenance, to get the crews. It would literally take from 3 a.m. in the morning till midday before we actually get in the plane. And I remember doing that, getting in the plane to fly to Townsville, and then there was an accident, and we flew right back. So literally from 3 in the morning till 3 in the morning, 24 hours, and we didn't even jump out of the plane. It's like so hard to get so many people moving all in the same direction. You think that people are just ready to get up in the morning and they've got their rifle, their webbing, all their ammunition next to them. No, they don't. They don't have any of that. All of that stuff's locked away in an armory. There's people that have to line up. There's people that have to come to work to authorize it. Someone has to sign for it. There's 1,000 things that have to happen. So it's no surprise that the Russians were so vulnerable, and if Wagner were going to march in there like that they did, that they were able to do that completely unopposed, because the cops are looking at him going, what am I going to do here? First of all, you'd be dead confused about what's going on. Like, what are these guys doing? Hey, boys, what are you doing? They're like, just move out of the way, man. We don't want to do it. Just move. And they're nice about it, right? Just move over there, man. Just don't worry about what's going on. And there's a picture of must have been about 20 or 30 police cars all together, and the cops are like all standing around scratching their heads going, what do we do? We can't block the roads. The tank will just drive over our car. It won't work. And there's actually some footage of 3 trucks that had blocked the road, and the tanks had just smashed them to the side of the road. They just drove straight through them. So, it's no surprise that the reaction was the way that it was. But then you look at it and you think, well, if he was going to drive to Moscow, why on earth did he drive east to go north? And he drove a long way east to go north. Is that because of the roads? Is that because he couldn't go around Donbass and Luhansk and around there, and he just couldn't go that way? And he'd just repositioned his troops to be there. And everyone's claiming that there was 25,000 Wagner troops. So here's where suddenly I started to go, this is not real. 25,000 people is a lot of people, man. That's a whole football stadium of people. But the only bit of footage that I see, the biggest bit of footage I see, was a column of like 6 BMPs. And if there's, say, 7 people, 8 people on each one, and there's 6 of them, so there's maybe half a company there. There's 50 people there. So there's 25,000 troops. And then you show me footage of a BMP, a tank, and a Tiger vehicle in the town square of Rostov. And you show me footage of 30 Russian Wagner soldiers stacking up to go and take the building. I'm going, there's not 25,000 people here. There's just not. There's only like 100 people. And then Prigozhin walks into the headquarters of Rostov there, and he's surrounded by 5 security guards and a bunch of other like Russian Ministry of Defense people, and he's talking to 2 generals. And I'm starting to smell a rat. I smell a rat, and it's that Star Wars thing. It's a trap. And I'm thinking the whole thing is a trap. And then the CIA guy is sitting on the couch watching like this going, everyone thinks that this is a revolution. It's not a revolution. What I think it is a total distraction based on this one single word, folks. And the one word is dilemma. And the fighting force on planet Earth that is expert at dilemma is the US Marines. The central piece of the US Marine doctrine is to create dilemma. So if I'm going to assault a position, what the US Marines will do is fire naval gunfire support, and they'll use aircraft to keep your heads down. And as you keep your head down, what I'm going to do is I'm going to land my troops on the beach. And as I'm landing the troops on the beach, I'm firing naval gunfire support using air superiority to keep your heads down there. I land the troops on the beach. The troops get the artillery and the mortars set up. And now I'm going to fire artillery and mortars at you. I'm going to keep your head down. You can't fire back at me because if you pop your head up, you're going to get it blown off. And now I'm going to move the infantry up. And as I move the infantry up, I'm going to move the artillery and the mortars up. And eventually I don't need the artillery and mortars anymore because I'm too close to the front line. I'm going to use the vehicles and machine guns to keep your heads down while I'm advancing onto your position. So what I think is really going on and what really happened was it was a classic example of look over here, don't look over here. And we now know that apparently, I don't know how we know, but apparently CNN told me that Prigozhin was on the phone to Lukashenko the entire day. And I'm thinking, my Vodafone phone doesn't work when I'm 400 meters away from civilization here. How the fuck in Russia would his mobile phone be working there? Does he have a satellite phone? If he had a satellite phone, even if it was encrypted, the NSA would be listening to it. Like, I don't believe it. How does CNN suddenly know that Lukashenko was talking to him the whole day? Lukashenko can't string 3 words together because he's sick as a dog. All the footage that you see of him, he's like an awake corpse. He doesn't look well. When was the last time you saw Lukashenko looking healthy and then he's negotiating with Prigozhin? Are you fucking kidding me? All of this stuff is like just bullshit. And this guy's lying on the couch going, yeah, this is what's happening. So what I really think is happening is the Russians are creating dilemma. And they're creating massive dilemma. So this came out just in the last couple of hours. Russia planned to blow up the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant. The plan has been drafted and approved. So the Ukrainian intelligence chief is talking about a dangerous escalation. 4 out of the 6 power plant units are mined with explosives and ready to explode. And Burdanov is saying that he's the Ukrainian intelligence chief. Russia has completed preparations for a terrorist attack at the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant. According to him, nuclear reactors without cooling can melt down in a period of 10 hours to 14 days. The situation has never been so serious, says Burdanov. And he stressed that. And the reason that I think that's happening is Wagner are going, oh, look over here, while they go over to Belarus like this, and the power plant gets clipped in the south, and then they're going to create a massive dilemma for the Ukrainians, meaning that they might blow the actual, the cooling pond. So they're not going to blow up the power plant. I don't think the Russians are going to do that. But they might blow the cooling pond to create a dilemma, to create a nuclear disaster, right? And they'll calculate how bad the nuclear disaster is. Or the Ukrainians will do that. And then that's carte blanche for Wagner to come in from the north. But we know that the Ukrainians have mined, and they have lots of defensive positions there from the north. But they mined Bakhmut, and they had lots of defensive positions in Bakhmut as well. And there's no reason why the Wagnerites can't come in from Belarus now. If they've repositioned and reconstituted all of their forces into Belarus, then there's no reason why it can't actually happen there. But we don't know. We don't know. The only people that really know this are the people that are looking at the satellite imagery, the intelligence folks, all the spooks looking down at, okay, there is 25,000 Wagnerites in massive columns, 200 kilometers long, that can drive over to Belarus, and they're now over in Belarus. Because they got 200 kilometers outside of Moscow and said, no, we're turning around and going back to our bases. But there's no footage of it. But CNN are telling me that. Go ahead.
Okay, 2 questions for you on that theory. Well, first of all, why would he need this ruse in order to go to Belarus? Couldn't he just go straight to Belarus? Why would he have to go through this long ruse to go to Belarus?
It's a distraction. The whole thing's a distraction to make you to look over here while something else is going on.
Okay, well now everyone knows he's going to Belarus, so that, the whole world now knows it. And number 2, as part of this agreement, supposedly these Wagner Group soldiers are being given the option of signing up for the regular military. So, all right, guys, you can.
But who told us that, right? And I saw that too, right? And at some point, you have to just work with the information that you've got in front of you. But it's mainstream media that are telling us all of that. So how Russia Today is mainstream media that's Russian propaganda that will tell you exactly what you want to hear, and you'll hear that, and all of the other mainstream Western outlets are picking up that story, saying Russia Today is saying that the Russian Ministry of Defense have given an amnesty to Wagner, even though they just killed like 30 Russian soldiers in friendly fire, blue on blues. No one's held accountable. All those people are dead, apparently. And then now you can come and join our army and we'll let him go over there. So did he go over there with his forces, or did he go over there by himself? Or is he sitting in the car like this when he's leaving, smiling at everyone because it's all a big joke? Like, I'm not sure. The only thing that I can think of that what you're seeing, because it's a very confusing situation, is the whole thing was a ruse because you never saw 25,000 troops. If you saw that, some massive amounts of troops on the move like that.
Well, I mean, it said that he had 25,000 people in his organization. He didn't. They weren't saying that they had 25,000 on the march, did they?
No, I heard both.
Okay.
I heard both. But don't let the truth get in the way of a good story, because it sounds good when there's 25,000 troops marching on Moscow, doesn't it?
Okay, well, God knows I'm not going to defend mainstream media, but the information we had was, I mean, we didn't have any sources on the ground that we could trust, right?
Well, we kind of did. The sources on the ground come from places in those locations. So, and that's the thing that kind of grinds my gears a little bit. I was watching a couple of people on Telegram that were actually in Belgrade, some Russian reporters and some Russian freelance journalists, and they were showing, she's in the town, she's literally in the town square saying, look, here they are, that they are Wagner troops. This is real. This is really happening. And there was one report where she said, she goes up to some of them like, what are you doing? And they're like, oh, we're just passing through. And she's like, well, why have you stopped here? Oh, well, we need to go and talk to them over there because we're going to hold the territory here and we're not going to interfere with anything that's going on in Ukraine. And so that she's there actually asking them, and you're seeing that, and I'm getting the translation of that. So is that fake? Doesn't look like it. That seems real. That's a real Russian soldier. But that was a real Coast Guard captain that I was watching on TV the other day as well.
This seems like a premeditated event. It wasn't spontaneous because because we know for one thing that these tanks, they have a range of like 10, 20 miles at best on a full tank of gas.
Yeah, I know. They don't go very far, do they?
Right. So they had to they had to set up the infrastructure ahead of time, ammunition, fuel, that kind of thing. And they're talking about how they had little supply depots along the way. And they take time to put together, right? And they had to do that on the sly, I'm assuming. So
so they're not getting busted by the Ministry of Defense and stuff. Like, what are you Wagner guys doing over here? What's going on? Yeah, exactly.
So there was planning with this. So you would think that Prigozhin had plenty of time to think through whether or not he really wanted to do this, whether he really wanted to, to go to Moscow. And then he gets within 170 miles of Moscow and changes his mind, because, the guy in Belarus, such a good negotiator.
I'm calling bullshit, man. The whole Twitter sphere just goes, what? Sometimes when something escalates and there's like a collective sigh of relief, like, oh man, I'm so glad that didn't happen, or somebody is found or rescued. Oh, thank goodness! The collective consciousness of the world went.
That's why I'm pretty much leaning to your conclusion that this has to be a ruse, because this had to have been planned out. They had to. Okay, yeah, everyone knew that they're building these supply depots in order so the tanks could go a certain distance. So it's probably planned all along that this was the plan. Maybe Putin and Prigozhin in the sauna cooked this up between the two of them and said, this is the plan.
That's not too far-fetched, right? We're just speculating here as well, right? No one really knows except Putin and Prigozhin what was actually going on. But it's just interesting because mainstream media would have you believe that this is actually the truth. Yeah. And nothing could be further from the truth, because they simply don't know. Neither do we.
Well, okay, so for me, one of the telling, revealing parts of this story was the way the media had already concluded that this was the coup, Putin's going to be gone, and thank God. And they were cheering this on.
Well, I was too. I got drawn right into deep state immediately in the first 9 minutes.
Yeah, and of course, what I was thinking, well, wait a minute. So Putin's gone. What then? It's known that Prigozhin is like 5 times worse than Putin as far as bloodthirst. Okay, I mean, Putin is a puppy compared to the brutality that Prigozhin represents.
He's a moderate, right? That's how you describe him. He's a moderate compared to these war hawks and these warmongers, these other people.
Yeah. So, as far as I'm concerned, we dodged a bullet. I'm glad there was not a coup, not only because of that, but also if Putin felt that he was gonna pull a Hitler within a couple of days, he probably think, you know what, I got nothing else to lose. Bring me those nuclear codes. That's the kind of guy you don't want to have desperate. Right?
The thing is, Putin has been there for 23, almost 24 years now, and so when you talk about nuclear codes and you talk about everything that goes to do with that doctrine, he's well versed in that, right? And I'm sure he's been to the brink and back several times. There's been lots of exercises. He knows what's going on. So to him, that's kind of part of his makeup as a human being and part of what he has to do as the leader of that country. But if Putin was deposed by Prigozhin or anybody else, and all of a sudden they're in a position where they've got the finger on the button and they can give that order, but they don't have the temperament or the disposition or certainly the training. Yeah, because the Russian military would have taken Putin through so much training over the years. He probably does that 2 or 3 times a year. He knows exactly, and someone knocks on his door late at night, hey boss, this is what's going on. Come out here, do this. And he goes through okay, what do I have to do next? What the decision? He knows exactly what's going on, right? There's extensive training that goes with something like that. And if one of these people just depose Putin and suddenly they got the finger on the button, it's what you said, man. It's like literally 1,000 times worse than what we've got right now. It's the better the devil you know, right?
Yep. Yeah. And it is a fact that the protocol for nuclear launch is much different in Russia than it is in America. In America,
it's not just Joe Biden going click.
That's right. and I actually prefer Russia's protocol over ours.
But that said, there's still like layers and layers of safety checks that go through. By the time it gets to the missile engineer and he goes, ready, 3, 2, 1, click, and they fire that ICBM, there's a lot going on there as well. It's also quite decentralized in the Soviet system that we know about, right? So, but that's based on the Soviet system. So do we really know how it works today? I don't know. What we do know, one really big threat is their submarines can launch from port and attack anywhere in the world. But the American submarines need to be halfway across the Atlantic Ocean to be able to strike Russia, to be able to do that. So there's one really considerable difference that's happening there. So you never know if the Russians are actually putting their nuclear forces in play because they're either alongside or at sea. If they're at sea, you assume yes. If they're alongside, then you have to assume yes. So their forces are always in play.
Okay, so for the fun of it, let me game out a scenario to you to ask a question. Okay, so if this were a Western intelligence operation, CIA, NATO, what were they trying to achieve in this? What do they think they're going to achieve with this? And well, let's start with that. What would they?
Thread.
Huh?
Yeah. Well, let's pull on that thread. So the whole point of us supplying Ukraine and not agreeing to anything Putin or Zelensky want, and us perpetuating this conflict, is to destabilize Russia so they go away forever. And we want to destroy their military so they're no longer an effective fighting force. But here's the reality. Here's the unspoken truth of that. This is a ground war. And even though the Russian Air Force has had its asses kicked, the reality is its Air Force really hasn't been damaged that badly in the scheme of things because they've got large numbers of aircraft. Whether or not they can actually put them into operation at scale if they needed to in a war with NATO, that remains to be seen. That is unknown. But it's largely intact. The Russian Air Force is largely intact. The Russian Navy is largely intact as well. But the Russian ground forces have been decimated. There's no doubt about that. And we know that because they're continuing with their conscription and they're continuing with the mobilization of normal people from all walks of life, and that's continuing. And we've seen that happen. So that says to me that their army has been decimated. And the reality is, in any conflict that you go into, you might have air superiority, you might own the oceans and the seas above and below the water, but you're not going to ever hold the ground because you need troops on the ground to be able to do that. And so far, this CIA operation is working because you're destroying the Russian forces on the ground and you're destroying their ability to seize and hold the ground. You might have air superiority right now, and they do, and that's simply because the Ukrainians don't have an air force to stop them. But the reality is, if we can decimate them to a point where their air force becomes irrelevant, and if their navy gets involved because the conflict it spreads wider, then we'll destroy their ability to make war. And now they're no longer relevant. We can bump right up against their borders and do whatever the hell we want. So that's That's where I think that's actually going. That's the whole point of this operation, and the whole point of this is to destroy Russia's ability to make war, which is what they've said about Ukraine. We want to denazify them and demilitarize them, and we're trying to do the same thing to the Russians.
But do we want an unstable Russia?
Well, that's the problem, right? And I don't think that the crazy people that are in charge of this saying that destabilizing Russia is a good idea realize that it's probably, we should have just left Saddam in place, man. Iraq was prospering. And if he wanted to buy oil with some other currency, euros, French francs, or whatever it was, just let him do it, man, because the amount of chaos that you created as a result of that was completely unknown. And now over a million Iraqis had been killed, thousands of allied soldiers had been killed, millions of lives have been destroyed, and now we don't have Iraq anymore, we have Iran, which are an even bigger enemy. So to your point, if they did destabilize Russia, for whatever reason, these people that are in charge don't care about the third and fourth order effects, because what they know is that the conflict will be perpetuated. And that's, there's that famous meme of the Grim Reaper knocking on the door of Iran and of Iraq and of Syria and all of these places, going in there and doing all of that. And it didn't matter what country it was in the Middle East, didn't matter what country the US military and the NATO and the allies went into, the coalition of the willing, if you like. It didn't matter what country they went to. All that mattered is the war was perpetuated in some country. So the military-industrial complex wins.
Well, no, this is the arrogance of the West on full display in terms of feeling the need to spread democracy. Now, I am a patriotic, freedom-loving America. I believe in the actual values that America stands for, and I think that every person should be accorded a chance at freedom and democracy. But there are some societies out there who don't particularly have an interest in democracy, and I think Russia is one of them. They had a shot at democracy, under Yeltsin, and they freaking hated it. The economy went to a shambles because corruption ran so deep there. And they had another shot when was it? 1999. So they had their shot at democracy, and they don't. I don't think from what I can watch in YouTube videos and Russian experts that I've talked to, they're not, the average Russian isn't that particularly interested in,
Well, it doesn't affect them, right?
Democracy.
So, they're able to live their lives. I remember when this war kicked off last year, I read a whole bunch of books about Putin and about Russia, and trying to educate myself in all of these things. And one of the things that stood out to me when the wall fell and when communism fell and Yeltsin took over, Yeltsin went around the country talking to everybody, and the thing that stuck out to me, I can't remember exactly the context of it, but the Russian people didn't really care who was in charge. What they cared about was that there was not going to be a war. That was the only thing that they cared about. And it's like, okay, we live in this existence. We have what we have. We can't really change it. But what we don't want is we don't want another war. There's not going to be another war, is there? And he was like, no, that's the furthest. Who we're going to go to war with? America are no longer our enemies. They're our friends now. And so that was the primary driver of it. Ed, I've been to plenty of places in the world, man, where there's no democracy. Been to heaps of them, man. Yeah. So if you go to the UAE, is there democracy there?
No.
United Arab Emirates, that's a kingdom, right? Go to Saudi Arabia. I've been there. There's no democracy there. It's the same thing.
And they love their king in Saudi Arabia.
They do.
He often walks down the street without any bodyguards.
One of the people that I employ, he's a Persian guy, so he's from Tehran. And when you ask him, like, I remember asking him about religion, and he's like, I'm not religious, man. I never get into that. So if you ask me a question about that, I don't know anything about that. And I said, so you don't go to the mosque and do all that? He's like, no. Most people in my generation don't do that. It's my parents' generation that are quite religious. And then you ask him, are you political? And he said, no, it's the same as religion. People just don't care about politics. They just want to live their lives. They just want to have an opportunity to live their lives. And he said that the reason that he came to Australia was, first of all, because it gave him the opportunity to go to university. And then when he went to university, he recognized that he would get some qualifications that were recognized back in Tehran or back in Iran. But then he also recognized that if he came here, it opened the door for him to get citizenship somewhere else. And it's like, well, why do you want to be a citizen here, man? Like, what do you need? He's like, I just don't want to go back there because I can't live the life that I want to live. And so this fella, he worked in our photography business, And we were the first people to give him a job. And he was at uni, right? And he grew up in the creative arts industry in photography. And in Tehran, it's a pretty interesting story. In Tehran, people don't just get married on a weekend, like on a Saturday or a Sunday, like in Western society. They get married every day of the week. And so he would go to school, and back in the day when the only photo editing software that was available was Photoshop, he would come to work in the afternoon after school, and they'd dump like 6 cameras on his desk, and he'd pull the cards out and he'd edit the photos and he'd do that. And when he came to Australia, he's like, I'm really good at this. I can do this. And I remember Susie needed some help. We put an ad up online. A couple of people answered, and she came home and goes, there was one guy that really stood out. He really, really, really stood out, but I'm not sure that you'd like him. And I was like, I don't care if he's from Mars. Employ the guy. We need help. Give him a job, you know? And he came in, and he's this Persian guy. He's like really like just so proper, man. Just so polite. They're so perfect at everything. And I helped him get up on his feet. I helped him start a business. He's got like a thriving wedding photography business now. He must do probably 10 weddings a month, doing incredibly well for himself. And I helped him, right? I helped him stand up on his own 2 feet. But over time, I got to know the guy, and the guy just didn't give a shit about politics, about religion, about anything. He just wanted to live his life. And he's like, man, you can do anything you want here in Australia, right? And he's never had a job. He's only ever, imagine that. It's a perfect immigrant story, right? Come from some war-torn country where you're repressed and you can't, girls can't walk around without a hijab on their head. You can't say something bad about the government, like, the president's a moron or whatever. You can't say that. And then he comes here. He's never worked for anybody else. He's always worked for himself because he's a contractor when he works for us. We don't employ him. He's a contractor. And he's made more money here. He owns a house. He got married. He got just perfect immigration story, man. Russians are exactly the same, man. Russians don't give a shit about any of this fucking politics, this war, or any of that, man. Most people on planet Earth don't care about it, man.
Right. I mean, Americans love, it's our favorite pastime, is to criticize other countries who have inferior government, setups where, hey, we got plenty of issues. You and I, we're making a living off of criticizing our governments.
Listen to this one. Yeah, we are literally. So a good friend of mine, Daniel, he worked for Emirates for a long time. So he was the boss of Emirates cabin crew for quite a while. And so obviously he lived in Dubai, and he has all these photos and these videos and all this stuff. And sometimes you see him in Arab getup, in their white getup with their head thing that they wear, and he's out on these boats in Dubai and living this life and stuff like that. And I remember asking him one time, what's it actually like living there? Like, I've been there a couple of times. I know what it's like. It's a beautiful place. The people are lovely, and it's pretty good. And he said, the only place that I've ever lived, and he's a Sydney-sider just like me, grew up in Sydney, born and bred here. He's traveled. Listen, he's traveled the world with Emirates, right? Been to every continent on earth, been to hundreds of cities, all of these places. And he goes, I've never been to a place that felt more like home. And he goes, whenever I came back to Dubai after being away for a week or whatever it was like, this just feels like home. And I'm like, well, what about Sydney, man? He goes, well, we used to come back and forth to Sydney all the time. And we'd go to get out of the airport and go to the hotel in the city, and you see the harbour and the opera house, and you go all those. Did that feel like home to you? And he's like, no, I couldn't wait to get out of here. And it's, we live in this democracy where the government's trying to implement a ministry of truth, but over in Dubai, just keep your big mouth shut and behave, and you can live like completely untouched by the government. The government, you don't even know who's in charge over there, because the rules exist. The rules are very strict. You don't step outside of those rules. And I think sometimes the system we have here is all wrong.
Well, it's all about whether the actual values that our countries are founded on are actually being adhered to, whether they're actually being honored. I know here in America, our politicians, they have no interest in the Constitution of the United States. And they do everything they can to subvert it. But I believe that the freedoms, that the values our country is founded on, they're true, and they're infinite. There will always be true. There will always be good values. The question is whether or not our societies, respect the values that our countries were founded on. I mean, in Australia, for example, I hate to pick on you guys because we have plenty our own faults. But you guys let them confiscate your guns. That boy, ouch.
I wasn't in the country when that happened.
I don't blame you, Rob. I'm not.
It wasn't me, man. I promise you.
If you had it your way, right?
It wasn't me. That's crazy, hey.
But how could your people allow that to happen? Listen, there are big forces in America who are still trying to take away our guns, who don't want to honor.
You're missing one important point in that point. So whenever you think about that and you have a conversation with an Aussie about that, I want you to raise this with them as well, because it's not just them confiscating our guns. You're not allowed to have anything at all to do with gun culture. So think of a little BB gun that you'd give to your kid, so I'll say this and it'll sound ridiculous to you. Do you think I can go and play airsoft here in Australia?
Oh no, come on! How about
so
paintball?
I'm not even allowed to go and play airsoft in Australia.
How about paintball?
Yeah, you can go and do paintball, but that's it. That's the extent of it. That's the extent of it. No airsoft allowed, and because that's like the threshold of gun culture, because they're real guns, they're the real shape, they operate the same way, and all of those things. So, and then now you're learning tactics. But if you look over to Taiwan, the way that they're training Taiwanese civilians is through airsoft, and you don't have to be in the Taiwanese military. But if you want to go and get yourself some training, there's really successful companies. There's been a lot of media about that here in Australia in the last couple of years, where these journalists go to Taiwan and they talk to they're all these ex-British SAS Special Forces guys teaching people close quarters fighting and close quarters combat, mount training, all of that you do, but it's all with airsoft. And people that are going through the training are like, yeah, every Taiwanese person needs to learn how to do this in case the Chinese invade. And it's, you're just not allowed to. So not only did they take our guns away, they took our ability to have anything to do with gun culture away as well.
Okay, I've got one final point that I want to make about gun culture before we move on to the next, because I want to move on to another question for you. That I can prove that guns are not responsible for gun violence. Okay, when I was growing up, you could buy a gun, you could buy a shotgun, any kind of gun in any hardware store. You go in, you get a hammer, get a gun, and you can pick up the bullets right along with it. On the back of magazines, you could order guns through the back of a magazine. Just to mail, you can order whatever gun you wanted, and there is no restrictions on the guns. And gun violence has only gotten worse since then. The cities, the liberal controlled cities in America, Chicago, New York, that have the strictest gun laws, they have the highest number of gun violence. Because the criminals, they're not going to respect the laws. They're going to get 50
odd people a weekend get shot up in Chicago, right? I see those stats all the time.
It's a disgrace. And they have the strictest gun laws in America, New York and DC. They have the strictest, and they have the highest rate of gun violence. That's because criminals don't respect the gun laws. All they're doing is they're keeping law-abiding citizens from owning the gun. And I still like to know, where are the feminists in Australia and in England and where the hell are you guys? Women should want guns more than anyone else in terms of self defense. All right, but moving on to a different thing here. So. As a young man, I did my world traveling. Then I got married and had my family and settled down family life. And now my boys are grown and I'm single again. So I'm daydreaming about where I would like to have my next big adventure, right? And I've got my short list.
Rostov.
Rostov. I've watched YouTube videos on
it was
Rostov.
On the list, man. I wanted to go to Russia. It was on the list. I wanted to go on the Siberian Railway, man.
There you go. Me too.
Damn it.
Me too. Russia was on my short list of countries, not just to go and visit, but to go and spend like a couple of years and really soak it in.
I agree.
And St. Petersburg, I still want to see St. Petersburg, man. It's supposed to be one of the most beautiful cities in the world. I would love to go to St. Petersburg and park myself there, see some operas and some ballets and see all the museums. I really still want to see St. Petersburg. But
if you spoke to normal Russians and you said to them, "Hey, would you like to go to Minnesota and see Minneapolis?" They'd be like, "Yeah, why not? That'd be good." "Would you like to come to Sydney and come and hang out on the beaches here?" They'd be like, "Yes, definitely, I want to do that." They're exactly the same as us, man.
Yeah.
You can't demonize these people, man, because the leadership are stupid and the military want to take over and do all of these things. Like, you got to you got to remember, they're just normal people living their lives that have the
that's right.
same hopes and dreams as us, man. You know, it's pretty stupid that they support some crazy person in power and doing all of that, but we've got crazy people in power doing that as well, and we support them. So what's the difference? We're no different in that sense.
We have large communities here in the Minneapolis, St. Paul area of Russians, Ukrainians, of Slavic people. There's a really good restaurant in St. Paul called Moscow on the Hill on top of Ramsey Avenue, and because it overlooks and they have like 50 different kinds of vodka. I tried a few. I couldn't tell the difference between them. They all taste the same.
My palate's not skilled enough to discern petrol.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. I'm like drinking gasoline, all that. Yeah. But beautiful people, wonderful people. Talking about family values. You're not going to beat a Russian or Ukrainian when it comes to
normal people.
Good tradition. Yeah, that's right. That's right. And everything else is politics and geopolitics. What's going on in Ukraine is primarily, I still believe this, is mostly about money. This is a money-driven war. This is a money laundering operation. That's what this war is. And it's not a war between Ukraine and Russia. It's a proxy war between America and Russia. That's what it is.
The war between Ukraine and Russia actually ended when they signed the peace agreement in Turkey a couple of months ago.
Yeah, they did another one a year ago.
That's what I mean.
Yeah. So this is about money. The people driving this war are BlackRock and JP Morgan for the most part.
So you had a question there. What was the question?
So the question, it wasn't a question. I just wanted a chance to comment about how I wanted to see Russia. And I still want to see Russia. Russia has, for me, when I give people my short list of countries I'd like to have adventures in, people always, when I give them my 3 countries, everyone chooses Australia. And nobody picks Russia, for me to go to. But I'm a history buff, and Russia has a fascinating history, a violent history, but a very fascinating, history. And I watched all the YouTube videos, and it's just a country. I like to go places that, it's out of the mainstream that most people, don't want to go to. For me, that's interesting. I mean, if I go to Sydney, yeah, okay, I do want to see the Sydney Opera House. Okay, I'll drive around. I want you to take me into the parking ramp below, and we'll do the corkscrew to the ramp. But then I want to do the unusual stuff in Australia. I talked to you about my dream vacation in Australia, which is something that nobody.
You want to drive in the desert across the Nullarbor or some crazy stuff like that. There's nothing there, man.
That's right. That's part of the point. I want.
That's the point.
That's right. I want. On the one hand, I'm kind of a sociable guy. I'll talk to pretty much anyone. But a lot of times, I just want to be fucking left alone. Just
we can sit in a car for like 19 hours if you want and say nothing. Look at nothing except the bitumen.
That's perfect. You see, 2 guys will do that. 2 ladies. Can you imagine 2 ladies in the car not talking to each other?
I used to work with a Russian guy. His name was Roman, and he was from Vladivostok. And so when I was looking for a freelancer to help me with some IT work, I was looking for somebody in my time zone, and trying to find an Aussie to get them to do what I needed to do was literally 5 times more expensive than what I wanted to pay. And I only needed a contractor here and there. And I found him, and I worked with him for probably about 3 or 4 years. So I became pretty good mates with him. And after the war happened last year, I just complete silence, man. Nothing on Slack, nothing on Telegram, nothing. So I'm wondering if he is off grid and trying to not be mobilized, or he's been mobilized and killed in the war. I have absolutely no idea at all. But to your point, Ed, when you talk about off the beaten path and where he lived in Vladivostok, it was near the Sukhoi factory where they make all the Su-30. Sometimes I'd be talking to him on Slack and I could hear fighter jets in the background. I'm like, what's that, man? And he'd say, they're all the Su-30s. They build them in the factory there and they test fly them there. And he actually worked for Sukhoi. He worked in the factory there, but he got paid a pittance. And he's like, all of my IT skills, because they're highly educated Russians, they all go to university. And he decided that he would make more money helping people build websites than build fighter jets for the government. And so he stopped doing that and started becoming a freelancer. And I was one of his clients. And, he must have had about, I think when I first met him, he had about 4 clients. But over a period of years, he had about 40 or 50 clients. He's like really quite successful in what he did. He built a little agency for himself, and he had a bunch of other developers. And every now and then I'd go to him with a harebrained idea and say, how could we do that? And he'd go, give me a day, I'll come back to you. come back to me with a really detailed plan, a scope of works, all sorts of really cool stuff. And, you know, I was pretty good friends with the guy. And I thought to myself, there's a bed I could go and stay at. You know, I bet you he'd make me a meal and he'd take me out and show me around when I go there and stuff. And when the war started, I was like, damn, you know, that means I'm never ever going to go and get to see him. And, you know, it's going to be very hard to reconnect with that guy or do something like that now, especially because there's complete radio silence.
Yeah, that's a good point. You know, so people who are watching, in the comment section below, please let us know your dream country. If you had a chance to spend 2 years, all expenses paid or whatever, just if you had a chance to spend 2 years, what would be your fantasy country you would like to go and park yourself in for a couple of years? And I also want to make a point in the kind of bragging rights. You know, we're streaming right now on a few channels. We stream on the Hey Ed YouTube channel and on the Rob Bruss channel and the Unspoken Truth and Minnesota Side Hustle. I just want to point out that I've got more followers on the Hey Ed channel than there is on the Rob Bruss channel. So thank you guys.
You tipped over, did you? Well, that's good. That's a good thing.
Thank you guys for tipping. Let us say hi. Let us know where you're dialing in from.
We definitely appreciate the support.
Yeah, we appreciate the support.
We tipped over 30,000 views on the Unspoken Truth channel just the other day. So, you know, this is the 7th week. This is the beginning of the 8th week now. So we're nudging up against 300 videos and 30,000 views. It's a full-on frontal assault with the creation, the content creation, and it's tracking along nicely. So we can't do that without the support that we've got from our viewers and our listeners as well. The podcast is going really well. Also, I noticed we were back in the top 200 of Apple Podcasts, and they say that no one looks closer at the polls than a podcaster or a politician, and I believe that's true as well, because there's 1,200,000 podcasts out there, something like that. But I think there's only about 400,000 active podcasts, and the way they determine that is by saying it hasn't had an episode uploaded in the last 90 days. So it seems like a lot of podcasts out there, but really there's not all that many in the scheme of the world and how many people have a smartphone and are tuning into that content as well. Statistically, podcasting is pretty interesting because about 50% of Americans, that's when it's considered mainstream, listen to a podcast more than once a month. So we now know that threshold was crossed a couple of years ago. So podcasting is now considered a mainstream form of media. So if we can be in the top 200 in a country for something that's mainstream like that, that's a pretty good accolade, I think, and that just shows the support that we're actually getting from our audience, which is really awesome. It's really awesome. I've still got a number one show here in Australia it's called the Electricians Co-op, and you know the goal is that we become in the top 10 for news channels and the Unspoken Truth. And I think a lot of that's got to do with consistency and just speaking truth to power and using that with our audience as well. So, you know, go ahead.
So on the Electronic Co-op podcast, what do you talk about? How to screw in a light bulb? What do you cover?
It's about small business. No, it's small business.
Oh, okay,
so
gotcha.
There's a lot of Sparkies out there that are working for somebody else and want to make the leap into their own business and the transition of doing that. And we share those stories. Sometimes the stories are like, "Oh my God, you did what?" And you know, how did you make such a big mistake when? And I look at the military aspect of what's going on here with the war in Ukraine. It's like, how do you keep making such big mistakes? Didn't you read history books? How can I know more than you? But you know, there's always much more going on than you actually really consider and what you're seeing on the front end as well.
So anybody out there, you know, if you haven't subscribed yet, please subscribe and hit that alert button so you're alerted as we do this video, because we really appreciate your support and you know, hit that like button because that helps the algorithm quite a bit too. So if you don't mind, it doesn't cost you anything. We're not going to put you on an email list or anything. We're not going to pester you, but it does help support the channel quite a bit. And especially tuning in, you know, on a Sunday here and a Monday there. You know, we just felt the need to say hello, given the events of the weekend. And remember, tomorrow I've got a very special presentation on the government scam around this Bitcoin ETF that's coming. And you're going to want to hear, whether you're in Bitcoin and crypto or not, there's a bigger scandal going on, you know, behind that story.
Well, I haven't heard anything about that, so I'm looking forward to getting some more info on that. What do you say we wrap this one up, Ed?
Ah, damn it. Sure. Okay, if you have to go. Well, you have a beauty appointment to get to, I guess.
No, I want to wrap it up because it'll keep it inside an hour for the first time. Can you believe it?
Whoa! How about that? Yeah.
All right, everyone. Thanks for joining us for the unscheduled show here today. We'll be back at same bat time, same bat channel tomorrow. God save the Queen.
Oh, you beat me to it. Damn it. Okay, very good.
See you tomorrow. Bye, everyone.